We've all seen the arguments and discussions on what bag to get. And rather than talking about what bag to get, I was curious how people are using their bags to shoot, particularly prone, because it's not a position I shoot a lot in. So I came out and I did a test, and I thought it was pretty interesting based on how I watched people pulling in a bag or pinching a bag or squeezing a bag, and tested, got some results at distance, and we're going to translate that distance to 100-yard paper printing to see if we can see if there are any patterns that come from the different styles that people use and shoot with the bags that they've got. Because I think more than what bag, the question that should be answered, or at least discussed or challenged and ask you to get familiar with, is what are the ramifications of how you use your bag in your consistency. So let's take some shots. All right, so to test this, we're going to play with distance first because that'll open it up. I can shoot, so I want to see those problems exacerbated. Once we see those, we'll bring it in on paper and we'll shoot groups to pattern them. But I'm going to start with some distance and the technique that I do most commonly, and then we'll see what happens. So let's take this out. This is a 308 shooting Federal. Okay, so I got 2 impacts. This is how I shoot, so this felt comfortable to me. We've got a camera out there to record these shots, but let's look at some of these other techniques that I see. One thing that you've probably seen before is putting the bag on, putting the rifle on the bag, and then getting behind the rifle and smushing it around until you find your target. And then the bag is largely supporting the rifle. And then whether or not you were told to drive into that rifle or load the bipods, we'll do both and see what happens. So here we are at a plate that I shot using those different bag techniques. And I think there's 2 things to point out. First of all, I didn't shoot that many rounds. And so when you get a nice tight group with a low round count, that doesn't mean that it's a representation of a bigger picture. But when something goes out of that, that's a heads up, because there you're getting one of those potential outliers. We'll have to review the footage, but you can see here that with the bridge techniques that I shot, all of them went into this. And I think that this group shows us that the wind deflection was pretty constant and there was nothing going on that was crazy. When I did the smush technique with the heavy load, this was for sure one of those shots. And then the other ones went in here. And so you can see here that with that smush technique, the proof is that that can be a bigger group. We'll have to review the paper to see what that looks like. But having one out of here could give you the wrong idea, right? I could have thought, oh, the wind was different. But I keep shooting for the consistency of that particular test. So it went impact and then somewhere in here. So we have consistent, out. The pinch method was off the plate and I kept walking it left, and there was no way the wind sped up to the point where it was going to be off like that, and it brought that in, and we'll have to review the impacts. And so that potentially had a group that was very large. And then the free recoil method had decent impacts even though I lost my sight picture. And so that adds another follow-on, is having accuracy, but the inability to get back on target could influence what you do, and it might not. But knowing that one technique is equivalent on accuracy and precision, but not on sight picture and speed to accomplish a second round, is a decision point that you have to know and be aware of before you make the call to utilize that technique. All right, so these are groups shot at 100 using those techniques. And what I wanted to do that I noticed at Steel I didn't do was build the position for each shot to see if there was shot-to-shot consistency in how the position was built as to what happened during the shot. So you can see here I also had 2 bags. So here, this was the Get Light in what I call the bridge, which is the one that I'm most familiar with. So I bridged with the Get Light, shot a group, and the point of aim and point of impact, you could see they're on this little black dot that we drew with the marker. I did the same thing, bridge with the OG. So this is the bridge with the OG Game Changer to see if there was anything. And just like this one, it's centered on the point of aim. And so those groups were consistent and reliable, which means that the data that I got from distance is going to be consistent and reliable. The next one that I did was just pull in the bag and provide heavy loading. And when the shooter adds input to the rifle, they're going to add error. And I feel like there's a point in a pressure sine wave where there's just right and you won't have a lot of wobble. Depending on the position, you'll get positional, but we're prone. So if you add more pressure, it's going to increase the wobble. But with that bag, I didn't see wobble in my sight picture. I did notice that after the shot, the sight picture settled in different places. And so I ended up taking 5 shots because they were wide. So this is high load, just smushing the bag in under high load. And then I wanted to do smushing the bag in without a high load and more like what I did for free recoil, and that was this. So this difference is the shooter pressure, right? So backing off that pressure here brought down the group if you're going to smush the bag in, and that you can see pretty clearly right here. Now the other 2 were the pressure applied by pinching the bag, and you'll note that when we shot out at distance, I used the same wind hold, and the first 2 shots missed the plate. And when I shoot here, you can see that there's a 2/10 deflection, and that makes sense here. So the pressure that's applied to the bag was firmer on the right side, causing the buttstock to move left and the shots to go right. So here you can see here that this 2/10 deflection was enough to get off plate with whatever this was. And then here what I did is, instead of pushing it firm from the right, because I thought if it has something to do with pressure, so I pinched the bottom pretty firmly, and you can see here that it went down about 2/10 low. And so it was going in the direction of the firmest pressure. And this wasn't repeated out a ton of rounds, and this was just me shooting with my technique that's used to this style, right? But I did notice that pressure applied on the buttstock through the bag had an effect on where the point of impact was, despite the fact that when I broke the shots, there was no wobble, and it was on these consistent points of aim. And so that's something that I encourage you guys to do, because whatever your technique is, you want to make sure that when you build a position, apply the pressure, shoot, there's something that you can rely on and depend on. Because in this case, I might have blamed the wind picking up by 2 miles an hour, 3 miles an hour, 4 miles an hour. This, who knows what I would blame. This, I might judge the dope, or check whether my Kestrel worked right, or whether my barrel slowed down, or the distance was off. So I think that all of these subtle shifts in decent groups have other explanations, except that here we isolated the variable to be bag pressures and bag techniques. And over distance, that'll amplify.